My name is Arne Kislenko. I teach 20th century history, but I've come here to Jerusalem to find out what life was like in the first century. There's plenty of security today all over this city, but that's nothing new. 2,000 years ago, temple guards and soldiers converged in Jerusalem's Garden of Gethsemane to arrest Jesus, setting in motion the most famous trial of all time. But I want to know who all these people are, what laws govern their lives, and what brought them all together on this fateful night. Because here, we're not only seeing the arrest of Jesus, we're seeing what happens when two societies collide. At the time, the Roman Empire was occupying Judea. So in the first century, how did the Romans keep the peace among people who had totally different beliefs about law and order? I'm in what many believe is the Garden of Gethsemane, the exact place where Jesus was arrested. It's hard to know exactly what happened that night, but we know that a crowd of soldiers arrived to arrest Jesus, and they wanted it done quickly and quietly. I'm going to explore with a modern arrest specialist how he would have conducted the operation. Nir Kalron is a former commando with the Israeli Special Forces. You know, imagine that this is the scene of Jesus' arrest, and you're running the operation for the Romans. How many guys, what kind of techniques?
You would have to have some regiments outside, maybe not very visible, standing by for crowd control, and then the small force, the snatch and grab force that's probably built of the informant. So someone that he knows, someone that he respects and has no problem, and trusts, exactly.
Right. So a guy like Judas.
A guy like Judas is a perfect informant in a way that he describes the routine, he describes the area of the operation.
Right. You do it at night, right, for maximum opportunity.
At night, of course,
right.
Yeah. Wait till they're, tired, and the night of the op, which is coming in, getting everyone ready, getting into positions. They might need a sign, and I think that's why maybe he kissed him. Comes in and kisses him, that's a sign, this is our man, and then they grab him.
And if something does go wrong, I mean, if somebody fights back or they're onto them?
Then it becomes immediately a noisy op. That means the whole contingency has to come in, secure the area, and ready to fend off maybe crowds, maybe the disciples inside that are getting crazy. If you see that there's going to be trouble, maybe take him, bring him out here, and then secure him, okay? And then all the others surround us. We're waiting for the contingency to come in, and then we take him out and leave as fast as we can.
According to the gospel, Jesus goes quietly across that valley. He spent a long night awaiting his fate. The simmering tension of Roman occupation of the Jewish people had boiled over. But the imposition of Roman law affected everyone's life here in the first century. The Romans divided their soldiers into legions, which were groups of 6,000 men. They had 30 legions, but they were scattered throughout the empire. There were only about 500 Roman soldiers regularly stationed in Jerusalem, and the local population was estimated at 60,000 Jews. So, how did they rule? I'm on my way to Jordan to find out, because there, in a well-preserved ancient city, the Roman army has been reconstructed. This is the ancient city of Jerash, and it is magnificent. Here, at the main gates, you get a real sense of empire, the power, and the might of the Romans. I'm meeting Stellan Lind, who runs a historical reenactment of Roman gladiators and charioteers.
They would have had their informers to find the guys who made the most trouble, and they would arrest them and they would torture them and put them in jail, and in the worst case, of course, have them executed.
We have this image of the Romans as being so effective, so powerful. I mean, what makes them so effective? What made them this, ideal fighting force?
When they attacked line after line after line. They were 9 lines deep. And so one line came forward and fought for about 8 minutes. They went back and had their wounds tended to, and then the next line came, and then the next line came. So it was really a killing machine, pretty formidable enemy to fight.
I think it's time I tried my hand at being a formidable enemy. But first, I need to learn about my weapons.
Here you have the gladius, the sword. Gladius having given the name to the word gladiator, by the way, a short stabbing sword. You stab with it. You don't fight like that. You stab.
It's very short.
It is very short because they calculated that for the stabbing technique that they had in fighting, that was the best length of the sword. They calculated, the Romans were very, very smart in engineering and into the minutest detail.
And it's very light as well.
This is the pilum, the throwing javelin. And let's look at the tip here. You know, it's a little bit like a bullet point here.
Yeah.
And the width of the steel here is just so that it bends when it has penetrated the enemy. That
Right
is,
there. It
yeah.
bends right there.
The idea with bending, of course, is that it makes it impossible for the enemy to use it and throw it back at you.
It's a one-time spear.
It's a one-time spear.
And it looks
exactly.
It really is light. Again, I'm
exactly.
amazed.
They were well equipped, and they knew that they were much better equipped, and the enemy also knew that, which was, of course, a very, very important psychological fact.
Scare the enemy.
Scare the enemy, absolutely.
Well, I'm ready to get suited up to scare the enemy. How long does it take you to dress? I want those shoes here. I'm looking good. The Roman army developed many ingenious uses for its shields. They weren't only used for protection, they'd hit you with them. And they'd use them in formations such as this for group protection. And look at this deadly formation. I wouldn't want to find myself facing that. So the Romans ruled by intimidation. But what are they doing here? What do they want? I'm on my way to Jerusalem to ask Professor of History Joshua Schwartz.
The Romans were interested basically in peace and quiet, and that people should pay their taxes when they're supposed to. If Jews had problems with one another, or if they had problems with their neighbor, then there was a Jewish court system, there was a Jewish legal system. And the last thing in the world that they would do would be to turn to a Roman official and to seek justice from that Roman official.
So it sounds like as long as things weren't, let's say, political in orientation, that the Romans sort of live and let Jewish courts deal with Jewish issues.
The Romans, when they interfered, normally they asked you whether you were guilty or innocent, and if you said innocent, they tortured you until you said guilty, and at that point they usually put you to death.
Did the Romans really have a sophisticated understanding of Jewish legal systems?
The Romans had almost no understanding of what Jewish life was and what Jewish legal life was. One of the mistakes that the Romans made was that they considered this neck of the woods to be the same as everybody else. But the fact is that the Jews are not, in that sense, like everybody else. Religious issues, as far as the Jews were concerned, made them very, very different.
This difference was the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, which govern every aspect of Jewish life. It's because of a law in the Torah that Jesus and his disciples are in Jerusalem on that fateful night. It was a religious holiday, Passover, a time when the Torah commands Jews to come to Jerusalem. In Judaism, religion, everyday life, and politics all overlap because the Torah doesn't differentiate between them. I'm meeting with Rabbi Ken Spiro, who's showing me the Torah. Its contents have not changed in over 3,000 years. I want to find out how Jewish law works. So the Torah scroll is the law?
Yes, it's called the written law.
So these are the commandments. The commandments are in here.
All the 613 commandments are expressed in the text itself.
And the 613 are the mitzvot.
Those are called the mitzvot, yes, that is the Torah. People assume, 10 commandments, but they're actually 613.
That's a lot more.
And there's a lot of details.
Let's say that I steal a goat. Is there a specific
Sure,
commandment?
there's a whole discussion here about if a person steals property.
If I steal a goat, there's a law which states that not only do I have to return or replace it, I have to give an additional goat as a fine. In an agricultural society where your animals were extremely important, the point of this law would be to discourage stealing. The Torah's laws cover everything. They cover what Jews can eat and cannot eat. There's a commandment to rest on the Sabbath, and it even tells them how to take eggs from a bird's nest. First, you must shoo the mother away so she won't have to see her children taken from her. There's even a law about writing the law. All Torahs must be written by hand. The Torah is revered by Jews who have lived by its laws, even when, as in the case of Jesus, it brought them into conflict with the occupying power of Rome. Jesus often quoted the law. He was fulfilling Torah obligations on this night. Before he was arrested, he and the disciples ate what is called the Last Supper, which was the Passover meal, commemorating the Exodus out of Egypt. The Torah commands every Jew to have a Passover meal, and part of that meal had to be some meat from a lamb sacrificed in the temple. The Romans must have found all this very strange, but as long as the taxes were paid, they allowed the life of the temple and its laws to continue. Behind me, you can see the Western Wall. The temple that used to be on the other side of that wall was the most important place in the Jewish world before the Romans destroyed it in the year 70. But the temple wasn't only the spiritual center of Jewish life, it was the place where the highest Jewish court, the Sanhedrin, would convene. I'm with archaeologist and historian Shimon Gibson, and we're heading underground to see the place where the Sanhedrin may have met.
So this is a labyrinth of tunnels and arches and passages.
Ground level in the 1st century has been buried by 2 millennia of building, but excavations have revealed buildings that were near the temple and not destroyed. I want to find out what effect Roman occupation had on the powers of the Sanhedrin.
And look at this amazing room. It's great, isn't it?
This is beautiful.
It's very well preserved. It dates from 1st century. Based on the sources, it might even be where the Sanhedrin sometimes convened.
So the High Court. This would have been the High Court.
Court.
I wanted to ask you about the connection between the Sanhedrin and the high priests. Did the Romans appoint the high priest?
The high priest was actually appointed by their priesthood, but of course, on occasion, the Romans would intervene. They would manipulate things behind the scenes to make sure that they got the candidate that they required.
How far could they intervene?
Clearly, they had a lot of clout in the 1st century, and at times were able to really to push things. The Romans were putting pressure on the high priest.
And we can see that pressure playing out around the arrest of Jesus. The men arresting Jesus are the temple guards, who report to the high priest. And these Roman soldiers are watching to make sure the situation doesn't get out of hand. In the 1st century, conflicting laws put the pressure on everyone, whether you were a merchant or a messiah. I'm in Jerusalem, in the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm walking in the actual place where many people believe 2,000 years ago, Jesus was arrested. I'm finding out how the Roman occupation of ancient Israel helped create the tensions which led to this arrest. It also led to conflicts for everyone else. Jesus was arrested at Passover, which celebrates freedom from slavery in Egypt. But under Roman occupation, Jews were slaves to taxation. Before the Romans came, Jews had taxation mandated by the Torah. The law of gleaning, for example, was a safety net for the poor to try to make sure no one went hungry. I'm meeting Joseph Gittler, who founded Leket Israel, an organization of volunteers who keep alive the law of gleaning.
You know, gleaning is a biblical imperative, which farmers were required to apportion a certain part of their fields for the needy. So what we're doing today is I would call it a modern take on a biblical law. And we're working with farmers throughout Israel who allow us to come into their fields and glean fruits and vegetables to distribute it to unfortunately needy people throughout the state.
Joseph, how exactly did the law apply to 2,000 years ago?
Farmers were required to allow poor people to come in and actually pick the fields.
Say a portion, meaning set aside a chunk of your land.
Yeah, generally.
So, did you know how much it was?
Generally, it was about 10% of your field had to be left for the poor.
The gleaning law helped keep the poor from going hungry. But because of Roman taxation, it also put more pressure on farmers who had less product to sell. The most famous gleaner in history was an ancestor of Jesus. Her name was Ruth. Not far from here, near Bethlehem, she gleaned in the fields of a man named Boaz. They fell in love, they had a child, and about 40 generations later was Jesus. Gleaning is a positive commandment one of the thou shalts. I also want to find out about the thou shalt nots. So I've come to Jerusalem's Mahane Yehuda market to meet Rabbi Yom Tov Glazer. Yom Tov, we're in a market, and I'm thinking, must be lots of commandments that apply around here, right? I mean, for example, are the prices of things, is that is that ruled by commandments as well?
Yeah, for sure. The idea in general is, as monotheists, is that it's not just that there's one God, it's that God is one. He's indivisible, and this is all going on. Ultimately, this entire world is like a figment of God's imagination, a giant video game to see if you and I will treat each other with oneness, i.e. win-win. So if I'm doing business with you in the shuk, I'm buying some produce or something, so that, yeah, there's price issues. For example, he can't overcharge me.
Yeah, but that's actually in the commandment? That's actually a commandment?
The commandment is basically don't steal. And in this case, it's also the commandment, because you're really stealing in a way. If you're taking his money above the market, but there's a separate commandment besides stealing, and that is not to afflict financially.
Not to overcharge.
Don't take advantage of people financially.
So he can't rip me off, but if I steal one of these grapes, did I just break the commandment?
Well, there is that old thou shalt not steal one.
But isn't this just really a list of, don't do this, don't do that, don't... It sounds kind of like that.
There's nothing arbitrary. You'll notice the don'ts are always kind of centered around where people are most selfish, which is two parts of the body, okay? Right. Survival and reproduction, which we share with the animal kingdom. Wherever it's animal instinct stuff, so you'll notice a lot of negative commandments. Right. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, so that your animal hasn't taken over the soul.
I get it. So it's about that balance, achieving that balance.
So like the Sabbath, there's a lot of don't do's.
The commandment to keep the Sabbath may explain why Jesus was arrested on what scholars believe was a Thursday. He couldn't be arrested the next day because Jewish courts could not meet on the Sabbath, which begins at sundown on Friday. But what is the reason behind this day of rest?
The Sabbath is a biggie because it's one of the most fundamental principles in Judaism that God created the world. And observing the Sabbath is a way that the Jewish people individually and collectively throughout history have basically one day a week bore witness to what is this most fundamental of concepts.
2,000 years ago, how was the Shabbat observed?
You could stoke your stove up prior to the Sabbath, but once it went cold, it was out. You could light your lamps, but once they burned out, that was it, But more or less, it was the same thing. Certainly in an agrarian society, this is a huge innovation. We stop working, and the world works without us because God runs the world ultimately, and we should be using one day a week to focus on that and to grow spiritually and to get out of the rat race.
It's Friday today, and much as they did in the first century, religious Jews are preparing for the Sabbath, honoring the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Jews followed their laws, and the Romans imposed theirs, keeping a close eye on these people who took time off from work for their Sabbath. To the Roman way of thinking, this could be trouble, giving the Jews too much time to think about who is now running their land. I want to learn more about how the laws of the Sabbath were followed then and now. So I'm headed to the home of Shoshana and Rabbi Yitzhak Goldstein. The Sabbath is always welcomed with a meal, and I'm here to help out.
We're gonna make our challahs now. We're gonna make a dough.
And this is like bread, right?
Right.
Challah? Okay.
Special bread for Shabbat. 6 cups of lukewarm water. Olive oil, sugar. Hey, you're good. 1.
One of the laws governing Shabbat is that all meals eaten on this holy day, from sunset Friday to sunset Saturday, must be made before the sun goes down on Friday night. And there are 39 specified activities that one cannot do once the sun goes down every Friday. I always thought this was only because one didn't work on the Sabbath, but there's more to it than that.
There's the work of creation. The whole day is you want to symbolize God. God says, I rest on a Saturday. I didn't create on Saturday.
Okay.
Be like me, don't do work of creation.
Okay.
So to do work, to pick up a chair, I'm allowed.
Okay, so I can't draw a picture.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we know we're going to run into problems we prevent. Like if you go into our kitchen, you open the refrigerator, we unscrew the light bulb, that when you open the refrigerator, you don't create that light.
Have you ever missed a Sabbath dinner?
No, never.
God forbid, let's say for some reason the normal schedule can't unfollow.
There's
you
no
still
such
have
thing.
to have a...
Must.
You must have a Sabbath day.
Must.
Those look fantastic.
Okay, put them right there.
That looks great, eh? I like that. Look at that. All the Romans cared about was that the Jews stayed orderly and paid their taxes. But they knew the Jews would not compromise on their sacred laws, which had to be followed. But if they weren't followed, what were the punishments? I'm in Israel, learning all about law and order and crime and punishment in the time of the Bible. In this famous scene from the Gospels, Jesus gets caught between two systems of law and order, the Jewish authorities and the Roman occupiers who eventually passed sentence. Under Jewish law, there was also capital punishment, but the Romans took away the right of the Jewish court to carry it out. Many of the Jewish laws called for the penalty of flogging if they were broken. Why this form of punishment? We know that after his arrest and before his crucifixion, Jesus was flogged on the orders of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. So flogging was both a Roman and a Jewish punishment. But what were the differences? I know I'm going to regret this, but I'm on my way to experience a first-century Jewish flogging. Today, prisons serve as both deterrent and punishment, but they weren't so common around here 2,000 years ago. Punishments such as flogging were meant to keep people in line. I'm meeting Rabbi Batsri because he knows flogging. He's even had this flogging device made, based on the texts. Okay, Rabbi, this looks mean. What exactly is this?
זה למעשה עשוי מאור של שור, והרצועות האלה זה מאור של חמור. למעשה, כשיהודי לא הולך בדרך השם, לא שומע על אלוקים, אז הוא יותר גרוע משור וחמור.
That's like, can I hold this?
כן, בבקשה. בית דין בודקים לפני זה כמה האדם מסוגל לסבול. בשביל לוקחים אותו קודם כל לרופא, לבדוק כמה מכות מסוגל אותו אדם לקבל, ולפי זה נותנים לו. אבל עדיף שגם זה לא יהיה, אבל זה קל.
This doesn't go on today, right?
לא ממשיכים, כי היום אין לנו בית דין, אין לנו סנהדרין בבית המקדש, היה סנהדרין. אין לנו את כל החוקים של המיתות, או במיתות בית דין.
I want to see it in action. Can you give me a good demonstration?
אם באמצע יכאב לך, תגיד לא, תפסיק. אין לנו פה רופא. לא קשה, אתה יכול לקבל כמה.
Why don't you do it?
צריך שהדיין יקריא לו, אני מכוון אותו, והוא השליח. מלכה, אני צריך לומר פסוקים. יש לי בקשות של מוסר, לתת לך שתתעורר ותבכה ותחזור בתשובה, זה לא רק לקבל מכות.
Well, I wanted to know what life was like in the first century, so here goes.
להיות רציני קצת ולהתחרט.
It's hard not to be serious when you're getting whipped on television.
והוא רחום, יכפר.
Whoa, wait!
חמתו.
That's all you got?
ולא, להשיב, להעיר, כל חמתו.
I do not get paid enough for this. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would be in Jerusalem being flogged in a synagogue by rabbis. Never occurred to me. So first century Jewish flogging had remorse and repentance as its goal. It had certain humane elements, but try telling that to my back. The doctor made sure you could take it, and only 39 lashes with this donkey or ox whip were allowed. Roman flogging was a little different. It's believed that the whip used on Jesus had metal ends to tear the flesh, and Rome had no law limiting the amount of lashes, not to mention the distinct absence of a doctor. Rome utilized flogging to prolong suffering before crucifixion. But why was this form of capital punishment utilized? I'm meeting New Testament expert Helen Bond to find out. How usual or commonplace was the idea of crucifixion under Roman law?
Crucifixion was fairly common, and the Romans were pretty good at crucifying people. I mean, certainly after major wars and insurrections, there were crosses lining the road for a long way.
Well, it would have a very sobering effect on the populace, right, to see that kind of obvious act of Roman power.
That's right. It's designed to be visual. It's designed to be as humiliating and shameful as possible. with crucifixions. You know, they always keep their loincloth on, but of course that the person was actually naked. It was deeply humiliating. It took a long time for the person to die, and they would have put a copy of the charge up above the cross so that everybody could see, you know, this is what this guy's done, and if you do the same, you'll get the same kind of penalty.
The threat of crucifixion seems like the ultimate law and order deterrent, but it was carried out quite a bit. Rome squeezed the populace with heavy taxes, backing up the threat with the ultimate punishment. Just like today, people in biblical times had mixed feelings about paying lots of taxes. It depended where the money was going, and if you could tell where the money was going. When King Herod ruled here and did his massive building projects, like expanding the temple in Jerusalem, Jews could see where their tax money was going. King Herod was Jewish, but he was appointed by Rome. Over 2,000 years ago, he built that wall. Herod taxed the population heavily, but he balanced the interests of both cultures. He died around the time Jesus was born, and the period of direct Roman rule by governors such as Pontius Pilate began. The delicate balance was over. I'm heading south from Jerusalem to Herodium, one of the fortresses built by King Herod, and where he is buried. Herod built these fortresses because he knew the delicate balance between Jewish and Roman law wouldn't last, and that revolution would come. An incredible fortress, Herodium is built into a hill. It's invisible from the road and has its own water system in case it came under siege. From here, the Roman-appointed King of the Jews punished people in the name of Rome. Rome was not only imposing its law and order on the local Jewish population, it also had problems with its own governors, who operated far away from the center of power. To learn more, I'm meeting with Alex Jacobson. He's written about the political system of the Roman Empire.
One of the main problems was that beyond what you had to pay Caesar, you had to pay the local officials. Being a governor in a faraway province was a way to get rich for many people. They would just extort and take money, sell judicial decisions, and simply, use riots as pretext for widespread confiscation, robbery, and enrich themselves.
It's corruption.
It's corruption.
Out of sight, out of mind. If you're in a remote province, that's their retirement plan.
That was certainly, that was very often the case. So the central government was interested in preventing excessive oppression and excessive extortion, and understanding that these were the things that would drive people to rebellion.
So even if they cooperated with Rome, the Jewish people were still being fleeced by local Roman corruption. And I've heard that when it came to punishment, the Romans were very creative. What other kind of punishments did the Romans impose?
Well, crucifixion was the worst, of course. They would, being decapitated was much easier. Sometimes people would be thrown to lions and all kinds of gruesome things.
So this is what law and order is like in the Holy Land in the first century. But how did Jews react to the imposition of Roman law? There was a range of reactions, from acceptance to deadly rebellion. Under Roman occupation of first century Israel, the way it was supposed to work was that internal Jewish law would deal with Jewish issues, and Rome would only intervene when there was a threat to peace, quiet, the collection of taxes. But it wasn't so simple because of the Holy Temple that used to be behind that wall, the Western Wall. The high priest was responsible for maintaining order in the temple, but Rome exerted plenty of influence on him. The high priest's cooperation with Rome led to gray areas of jurisdiction, which affected both the daily life of the temple and the fate of Jesus. But whose law did Jesus break? Some say he committed heresy, which as religious law was a Jewish matter. Some say it was insurrection or sedition, which Rome considered its turf. But if Jesus called himself the Messiah, that was a gray area. Was it religious, or did it affect the peace and quiet? By gathering followers and saying the kingdom of God was at hand, Jesus was someone who got everyone's attention. The Romans didn't want anyone talking about any other kingdom than theirs. And anything that threatened the fragile peace worried the priests, who needed the Romans to leave the temple alone so they could keep fulfilling their holy functions. So the high priest had a good reason to cooperate with his Roman occupiers. The priestly class he belonged to was called the Sadducees. They were only one among many Jewish sects, and I'm going to find out about the others and their reactions to Roman law and order.
There's all kinds of different groups within first century Judaism, all with very different ideas of what it means to be Jewish. So you have the Sadducees, who are mainly linked with the temple. They're the aristocratic priests. Then you have the Pharisees, and these are ones who are very keen to keep the law very strictly.
Though debated, some scholars believe Jesus himself was a Pharisee. Then there were the Essenes. This Jewish sect believed in the coming of the kingdom of God, and they wrote about it here in Qumran, by the Dead Sea, and what are some of the oldest documents ever found, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm with author and biblical expert James Tabor to find out more about this Jewish sect and to see the actual place where they hid their scrolls from the Romans.
You've heard of Pharisees and Sadducees, right? In the Bible. The Essenes aren't mentioned, but they're a radical, apocalyptic group. They're waiting for God to destroy the Romans.
And this is where the scrolls were actually found.
Take a look. It's amazing.
Wow. That's a pretty tight fit. James, do people go in here?
Well, believe it or not, very few people go in here. It's not a tourist spot, but you're allowed to go in. You should go.
Can I go in?
Take a look, get an idea.
Okay, the question is, can I actually fit through?
Yeah, can you fit? Are you as thin as an Essene?
They must have been pretty nimble and pretty tough, I'm thinking.
Yeah, the gazelle goat comes to mind.
Because it is really rocky and it is dirty. Among the contents of the Dead Sea Scrolls were passages from the Bible. The Essenes, who lived here in seclusion, believed their interpretation of Jewish law was the correct one, to live simply and spiritually, away from others who, they believed, did not live according to the law. They also wrote about war, describing a battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Among Jesus' disciples, there may have been Essenes, as well as radicals belonging to other Jewish sects who would end up fighting this war. In Greek, the disciple Simon Zelotes' last name means zealot. The zealots believe that God alone is the ruler of Israel and that the Romans must be expelled. Some say Simon was a member of this nationalist group. And among the zealots were a sect which utilized extreme tactics. They were called the Sicarii, named after the short Roman dagger, the sica, that they hid in the folds of their robes. They attacked their enemies without warning, then blended back into the crowd. The Gospels tell us that when Jesus is arrested, his disciple Peter pulls out a knife and cuts off the ear of one of the temple guards. We don't know that Peter was a Sicarii, but he was handy with a knife. Some scholars say Judas Iscariot was also a member of this group, and his name means Judas the Sicarii. Maybe Judas thought Jesus wasn't revolutionary enough. The war of the Zealots against the Romans culminated right here, at the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, with the Jews barricaded inside.
And as these people are locked and encased in Jerusalem with the Romans outside, the Romans come into Jerusalem, they burn down the outer parts of Jerusalem, and the temple itself is burnt to the ground. It's
destroyed.
And that was a terrible, terrible moment for Jews in the first century, and still for Jews, it's a terrible thing that happened, because there are all kinds of different ways of being Jewish in the first century, but the thing that holds everybody together is the Jewish law and the temple. And when the temple goes, nobody can understand it. You know, how do you explain that? How did God let the temple be destroyed?
These stones were part of the temple wall, destroyed by the Romans. So today, you can still see the evidence of that biblical clash between two systems of law and order. According to the Gospels, Jesus foresaw the destruction of the temple. Ironically, the sequence of events that followed his arrest may have been partially responsible for the actions that culminated right here. So how did the trial and sentencing of Jesus take place on that fateful Passover? And if you were an average citizen in those times, what message were you being given by the whole process? Well, This is where it all happened. On Passover, Jewish pilgrims from all over the Middle East and beyond would have come right here. They would have walked up these actual steps to the temple. So what was it really like in the first century here? I'm going to meet with Helen Bond, and she'll set the scene.
Jews from all over the place are converging into what's really quite a small city. It's a huge pilgrimage. People have journeyed long ways. They've come here with their families. They've given up work for a week, 2 weeks, possibly even more. And there would have been a huge festival atmosphere, celebrating coming out of Egypt, liberation.
During festivals such as Passover, pilgrims to Jerusalem swelled the local population to hundreds of thousands. From a law and order perspective, if I were a Roman, am I nervous about these kind of gatherings?
Very. I think Passover was probably Roman's worst nightmare.
Pontius Pilate and the 3,000 Roman soldiers stationed with him at Caesarea also made the trip, just in case there was trouble.
It's national liberation from bondage. But the difficulty is that here they are in Jerusalem, and they just need to look up on top of the temple, and they'd see Roman soldiers stationed there. Yeah. Must have struck them as being a huge irony. One of the reasons why the governor comes to Jerusalem, specifically at the Passover, is because it's such a security nightmare. The Jewish author Josephus says that nearly all the riots that we know about happened at Passover.
Really?
So this is sort of a known time for riots, rebellions.
But the soldiers are vastly outnumbered by the pilgrims. So what's the Roman strategy?
They're fine for a fairly small-scale uprising, but there's always going to be a need to sort of nip things in the bud, you know, to make sure that any kind of riot doesn't escalate, because once it escalates, then it's too big for the Roman governor to cope with, and he's got to contact his superiors, and that all looks bad on him, because his main duty in the province is to maintain law and order.
Where do you cross the line if you're a Jew to bring the Romans in?
I think as soon as somebody starts attracting large numbers of people, it's just that uncertainty as to what's going to happen. Romans never liked congregations of people. They were always slightly disturbed by that. If people are stopping doing their work and they're gathering and there's any potential for a riot, then that's when the Romans start to take a notice of what's happening.
So kicking over the money changers' table, is that a violation of Roman law?
It was a sign that this was a troublemaker. And particularly when he did that with a following, this is a man who you need to watch.
Right.
And he's doing something provocative, and he might go somewhere else and do something broader scale than that. You know,
so nip this in the bud,
exactly.
sort of approach to it, and that's where Pilate comes in.
Well, according to the Gospels, it's the chief priests who make the decision that they want to have him arrested, and they're going to pass him over to the Roman governor, because the chief priests also had to make sure that law and order was maintained.
So the temple guards arrest Jesus and take him to the home of the high priest, Caiaphas. Shimon Gibson and I are now overlooking the valley Jesus crossed when he was taken from the Garden of Gethsemane. This Church of St. Peter was built next to a house dated to the 1st century, and we're heading there now.
So here we're going to step back 2,000 years to the 1st century, and we're going to enter into a house that exists at the time of Jesus and is in the general vicinity of the traditional house of Caiaphas. Step inside.
I'll take off my hat there out of respect.
Yes, that's
so this is the real deal. I mean, this is a house from the time of Jesus Christ.
Exactly. I mean, here you're inside the internal courtyard. You have this depression in which they would place the charcoal and be able to have a little fire going. It fits in very well with the story of Peter, who is following Jesus and who's been taken away by the soldiers and is brought to the house of Caiaphas. And he comes in to the courtyard and he sees the soldiers sort of warming their hands at the fire. So this really sort of serves a good purpose of illustrating the point of that story.
So when they bring Jesus here, where do they put him?
He's here overnight, so he was probably placed into one of the rock-cut chambers which existed beneath the structure. This was a common practice at that time. This is a subterranean chamber beneath this house from the 1st century, so it's likely that it would have been in a place such as this, but more likely in a sort of dark cavity such as this one over here.
Ah, really?
You see, it's really quite dark in here, and...
So they would have just tossed him back there?
Exactly. they would have got rid of him, kept him in there until he was led away for his trial.
Jesus is brought before the high priests for questioning, but they soon hand him over to Pontius Pilate, who serves as judge and jury. So what was the charge?
A couple of the Gospels suggest that blasphemy was the charge, and certainly acting or doing anything against the temple could have been seen as blasphemous because it's such a holy place. Another couple of the Gospels suggest that it was simply the charge of leading people astray or being a false prophet. And those are very broad charges that could be interpreted in a number of different ways. But probably they didn't really need a specific charge anyway, because they're intending passing him over to Pilate. Clearly they would have to give Pilate a list of the things that Jesus had done.
So were there any other sort of considerations that Pilate would have?
Pilate would probably have spent very little time on the case. I think he would have simply heard from the chief priests what Jesus had been doing, maybe interviewed him himself very briefly, just got some sort of measure of the man, and also get an idea of whether he had to get rid of the followers as well, or whether just getting rid of Jesus was going to be enough. And I think he would have sent him for crucifixion with barely a second thought.
It was nothing like trials today, and the sentence was carried out the next morning. Unlike the stealthy arrest, once the suspect was in custody and the sentence carried out, the punishment was meant to be seen by everyone. Whatever crime Jesus was charged with when he was arrested, the eventual charge, nailed to his cross, was King of the Jews, suggesting he referred to himself this way, which Rome would see as treason, since it appointed kings around here. Before Jesus was born, Rome had given the title King of the Jews to Herod. Shimon and I have now arrived at where Herod's palace was located. It was right behind these walls. The palace was later used by Pontius Pilate when he was in Jerusalem. So are we in the place where Pilate tried and sentenced Jesus?
Well, he's led away in the early hours of the Friday morning and brought to the seat of Pontius Pilate. It was situated, archaeologically speaking, behind these walls. And in front of this wall, these remains were uncovered, and there was a gate here.
And it must have been a grand spectacle. These walls are massive, and you can imagine the assembly of people here. Based on the archaeological finds here, Shimon has made this drawing of what it would have looked like in the time of Jesus.
So here you can see the rocky protuberance in that area, and that's situated over there, which is actually referred to in the Gospel of John as Gabata, which is a Hebrew word meaning rocky outcrop. And then on the right, you had an area of pavement, and this is referred to also in the Gospel of John as the Lithostratus, which means in Greek stone pavement. These two topographical features are referred to in the Gospel of John.
So it's probable that this is where Jesus was brought out, right here before the public.
Yes. I think this is the place of the trial. So Jesus is imprisoned in the barracks. He is led out into this area here, into this area of a courtyard. The crowds are able to observe proceedings.
And for Pilate, the message is, I'm in charge, and here's what happens if you defy Roman law.
He wants to make a point. He wants to say to those crowds, look, I'm going to be crucifying this guy. I don't want any more problems during the Passover period. And you'll see the cross next to the road leading out of Jerusalem, and you'll know.
You'll remember.
That I do not want any more disturbances within the city.
And this is Roman law and order, plain and simple.
And that's how the Romans conducted their business.
If you lived here at the time and heard what happened to Jesus, you would have received a pretty strong message about law, order, and the consequences of opposing Rome. Jesus is the one we've heard about, but in the land of Israel under Roman occupation, thousands of Jews were crucified by the empire, which wanted to subdue the citizens into paying a punishing amount of tax. So what was daily life like for the Jews after the crucifixion of Jesus and the destruction of the temple? Hundreds of thousands had been either killed or enslaved, but there were still some members of the Zealots and Sicarii alive. They were living here, at Masada. Herod had fortified this place to fight potential rebels, but the Jewish rebels defeated the small Roman garrison stationed here. The Jews took over Masada, but in the year 73, the Romans returned with 6,000 soldiers. and set up camp to fight the 960 Jewish rebels, the last ones left to defend the Jewish law. I'm with Guy Stiebel, who has excavated here at Masada, and we're walking through what used to be the Roman camp.
This is the best preserved Roman siege system in the entire Roman Empire. And if you want an example for the long hand of the law, the Roman law, they went all the way to the middle of the desert. And just imagine that on both sides you'll have tents. You have 8 camps all around Masada. And this was a statement. See us, we're here, and it's a sort of a propaganda.
We're coming to get you.
Exactly.
But Masada is not only the place where a battle occurred, it's a place where people lived.
Because all communities, rich people, poor people, fled to Masada. So we have clusters of rooms. It's like you can seize different communities. I can identify the areas where women, for example, sat and weave. We found a bakery. We can see lists of various provisions, where the food was stored, who brought the water. So we can speak about life at Masada. Yes, death will come at the end of the day, but I think the stronger thing that you can see here is people fought to live.
So how did the 960 Jewish rebels fight back? They had the high ground and could drop huge stones on the Romans.
What you see is actually genuine rolling stones. I mean, they're my favorite type of weapon, if you wish. This was a Jewish answer for the Roman superiority using the artillery. They just roughly shaped huge stone. You can try move one.
Are these the original ones?
Yeah, you can try to move one and see. You need a hand.
There's a trick here.
No trick. Look how heavy they are.
Oh man, that's heavy. But the Romans were building a ramp and a siege tower, and constructing a battering ram to break down the wall that separated them from the Jewish zealots. It was 4 decades after the death of Jesus, and the exact same time of year, the festival of Passover.
The idea was to bring the siege tower, on top of which they have a battering ram, and these are the most important 15 meters. That's all. The entire operation was for this place.
So, Guy, this must have been a frightening thing to see, this giant tower coming up this ramp.
2,000 years ago, on the eve of Passover, it was nightmare. The noise, the smoke, the shouts, the crowd. They knew that once they managed to bring these things up, they're doomed. Once the tower was up, and they managed to breach the wall, then they discovered that the Jews built another wall, secondary wall, made of soil and beams, against which the battering ram is not effective. But you can use torches with fire. Then the night came, it went up in flames.
What are their options? They're surrounded, right?
Are we going to die as free people, or by the sword of the Romans? They summon all the men, and what happened is that they decide to commit suicide.
There are women and children here, are there not?
According to Josephus, a lottery was made. It means they draw lots. 10 men were chosen to go through the people and to do the act, and then commit suicide. Just imagine the Romans are breaking into the site, dead silence. Literally dead silence. And what we hear is that they shout, and suddenly 2 women and 5 kids come out of one of the water cisterns that's scattered around the site, and they told the story about the occurrences of that night.
Before the rebels died here at Masada, they lived, according to Jewish laws, as long as they could. The last vestiges of uprising were over. It wasn't peace, but it was quiet. When it came to law and order in first century Judea, on one side there was Roman power, and on the other there were the Jews with their traditions, their laws. One side never had a chance. That side turned out to be the Romans. Their empire, their power did not last, but the Jewish group whose leader was arrested in Gethsemane ended up becoming the biggest religion in the world, with one of its spiritual centers in Rome. As for the rest of the Jewish people, their culture is still here. The temple had been destroyed, but it wasn't the only center of Jewish life. The Torah, the law, was and still is.